Hello Reddit. This is the first time I've been allowed to post, so please bear with me while I get used to it all. I need to share my story and perhaps get some advice. Here goes. I TFF escaped from a cult I was born into a few months ago, and my life has been a whirlwind since then. The cult I can't name, but I will call it the Brotherhood, was a closed-off, tightly controlled community that isolated us from the outside world. We were taught to fear outsiders and rely solely on our leaders, who claimed divine authority. My journey to freedom began when I found an old, tattered book hidden in the basement of our commune. The book was a diary, written by a woman who had lived there decades ago. Her words opened my eyes to the truth about the Brotherhood and its dark secrets. The Brotherhood's leader, who everyone called the Shepherd, ruled with an iron fist. Disobedience was met with harsh punishment, and questioning the doctrine was considered a grave sin. We were taught that the outside world was evil and that only within the Brotherhood could we find salvation. One night, after a particularly brutal punishment session, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a small bag with some essentials, including the diary, and waited for the right moment. When the guards changed shifts, I slipped out of my room and made my way to the perimeter fence. With my heart pounding, I climbed over and ran into the darkness, not looking back. My escape was just the beginning of my journey. The outside world was overwhelming and terrifying. I had no idea how to navigate it, and my upbringing left me unprepared for the simplest tasks. I spent the first few nights sleeping in parks and scavenging for food. Eventually, I stumbled upon a women's shelter. The staff there were kind and patient, helping me understand the basics of living in the real world. They provided me with clothes, food, and a place to stay while I figured out my next steps. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in cult deprogramming. The sessions were painful but necessary. I had to confront the psychological scars left by my upbringing and unlearn the toxic beliefs I had been indoctrinated with. It was during these sessions that I began to truly understand the extent of the Brotherhood's manipulation and control. As I healed, I became determined to uncover more about the Brotherhood's secrets. The diary hinted at abuses and corruption, but it was vague and incomplete. I decided to investigate further, hoping to find justice for myself and others who had suffered. I reached out to former members who had escaped years before. Their stories were harrowing, confirming my worst fears. The Shepherd had used his power to exploit and control, and many of the supposed divine revelations were nothing more than tools of manipulation. One of the former members, a woman named Emily, had been a high-ranking member before she escaped. She had access to documents and records that exposed the inner workings of the Brotherhood. Emily shared these with me, and together we compiled evidence of the cult's crimes. I contacted journalists and law enforcement, presenting them with the evidence we had gathered. The authorities launched an investigation, and the media picked up the story. The public outcry was immense, and pressure mounted on the Brotherhood. As the investigation unfolded, I received threats from cult loyalists who wanted to silence me. But I refused to back down. With the support of Emily and other former members, I continued to push for justice. Eventually, the Shepherd was arrested, and many of his enforcers were brought to trial. The Brotherhood's compound was raided, and the remaining members were given the opportunity to leave and receive support. My journey is far from over. The scars left by my time in the Brotherhood run deep, and healing is a slow process. But I am determined to rebuild my life and help others who have suffered similar fates. Update. Hello Reddit. I'm back with an update. After sharing my story about escaping the Brotherhood, I received so much support and encouragement. Many of you asked for more details about my life in the cult, so here it goes. This is a long one, but I think it's important to share the full picture of what I experienced and how it shaped me. Growing up in the Brotherhood, my daily life was a mix of strict routines, relentless indoctrination, and constant fear. From an early age, we were taught that the outside world was filled with sin and corruption, and only within the walls of our community could we find salvation. Here are some of the key aspects of life in the cult. Our days started before dawn with a communal prayer session in the Great Hall. The Shepherd would lead us in chanting and meditation, instilling in us the importance of obedience and devotion. We were taught to believe that the shepherd was a direct conduit to the divine, and his words were law. After morning prayers, we would have a simple breakfast, usually porridge or bread with water. Meals were communal and silent affairs, meant to remind us of the virtues of humility and discipline. After breakfast, we were assigned various tasks based on our age and abilities. Children and teenagers attended the communal school, where we were taught a heavily censored version of history and science, with a strong emphasis on religious doctrine. Critical thinking was discouraged, rote memorization of scriptures and the shepherd's teachings was the norm. Adults were assigned laborious tasks, farming, construction, and maintenance of the commune. Every task was framed as a form of worship and a way to prove our devotion. Idle time was considered sinful, so our days were filled from dawn to dusk with work. The core belief of the brotherhood was that the shepherd was chosen by the divine to lead us to salvation. We were constantly reminded that the outside world was doomed, and only through strict adherence to the shepherd's teachings could we be saved. Women were taught to be subservient and obedient, destined to serve the men and bear children to continue the community. Any form of dissent or questioning was met with severe punishment, often public, to serve as a warning to others. Children were indoctrinated from birth. We learned to recite prayers and scriptures before we could walk. The fear of divine retribution for any form of disobedience was drilled into us. The shepherd's word was considered infallible, and any deviation from his teachings was seen as a direct affront to the divine will. Punishments in the brotherhood were harsh and designed to break the spirit of the offender. Common punishments included isolation, public humiliation, and physical beatings. The most severe punishment was the purging, a ritualistic form of torture meant to cleanse the soul of sin. The threat of punishment kept us in line. We were encouraged to report each other's misdeeds, fostering an environment of distrust and paranoia. The shepherd's enforcers, known as the Watchers, patrolled the commune, ensuring that everyone adhered to the rules. The psychological manipulation was perhaps the most insidious part of life in the brotherhood. We were taught to distrust our own thoughts and instincts. Any doubt or critical thinking was labeled as the influence of evil forces. The psychological manipulation was perhaps the most insidious part of life in the brotherhood. We were taught to distrust our own thoughts and instincts. Any doubt or critical thinking was labeled as the influence of evil forces. The shepherd used fear to control us, constantly reminding us of the dangers of the outside world and the eternal damnation that awaited those who strayed from his path. This created a deep-seated fear of leaving the commune and instilled a sense of helplessness. My escape was a combination of desperation and a spark of hope. The discovery of the diary in the basement was a turning point. It was written by a woman named Miriam, who had lived in the commune decades before. Her words spoke of abuses, lies, and a desire for freedom. Reading her diary, I felt a connection and a growing realization that I had to get out. I planned my escape meticulously, knowing that any mistake could lead to severe punishment or even death. I observed the guards' routines, noting the change of shifts and the blind spots in their patrols. The night I decided to escape, I waited until the commune was silent and the guards were at their least vigilant. Climbing over the perimeter fence was physically challenging, but the adrenaline and fear pushed me forward. Once on the other side, I ran without looking back, driven by the hope of finding freedom and the fear of being caught. The outside world was a shock. Everything was overwhelming: the sights, sounds, and the sheer number of people. I had no idea how to navigate this new reality. I spent the first few nights in parks, scavenging for food and sleeping on benches. The fear of being discovered and dragged back kept me on edge. Finding the women's shelter was a turning point. The staff there were kind and patient, helping me understand the basics of living in the real world. They provided me with clothes, food, and a safe place to stay. It was at the shelter that I first met my therapist, Dr. Simmons, who specialized in cult deprogramming. Therapy was a painful but necessary process. Dr. Simmons helped me unpack the psychological scars left by the brotherhood. We worked through the guilt, fear, and self-doubt that had been ingrained in me. I had to unlearn the toxic beliefs and rediscover my own sense of identity and autonomy. As I began to heal, I became determined to uncover more about the brotherhood's secrets. With the help of Emily, a former high-ranking member who had also escaped, we compiled evidence of the cult's abuses and corruption. Emily had access to documents and records that exposed the true nature of the Brotherhood. We contacted journalists and law enforcement, presenting them with our evidence. The authorities launched an investigation, and the media picked up the story. The public outcry was immense, leading to increased pressure on the Brotherhood. The investigation culminated in the arrest of the shepherd and many of his enforcers. The compound was raided, and the remaining members were given the opportunity to leave and receive support. The shepherd's trial was a media spectacle, and his conviction brought a sense of justice and closure. My journey is far from over. The scars left by my time in the Brotherhood run deep, and healing is a slow process. But I am determined to rebuild my life and help others who have suffered similar fates. I've connected with other survivors, and together we are working to support each other and raise awareness about the dangers of cults.